The Cirrus Vision Jet is a really impressive aircraft on paper. It's got a range of 1,275 nautical miles. That's the equivalent of Melbourne to Alice Springs, London to Greece, even New York to Dallas. It can cruise at over 310 knots. It's got state-of-the-art Garmin avionics, really good safety features, and it's actually really simple to fly. But if you did have a spare 2 to 3 million US dollars to spend on an aircraft like this, what are actually some of the considerations and costs when it comes to actually owning and operating one? I wanted to find out a bit more about the Cirrus Vision Jet, and luckily my friend Philippe, when I was back in Europe a couple of weeks ago, he had a Vision Jet that needed to be delivered to a new location for maintenance, and he asked me if I wanted to come along. So of course I said yes. But what's the mission today?
Well, we're bringing a Vision Jet to a maintenance center.
Yep.
And we have a little paint work to do and scheduled service. So no big deal, but that maintenance center is in Germany, near Munich. So we have to get to Augsburg is the name of the town.
Augsburg, okay.
Yep.
Is this routine Echelon Air stuff? You get to fly nice jets to amazing places?
I mean, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing place, like a service center in Augsburg. Well, we're trying to take some friction out for our owners, right? So,
yeah.
You know, if the owner's busy, I mean, the owner of this one is in another country at the moment. So we're just flying it over to Augsburg, service, and then we'll commercial at home.
And what's our flight time roughly today to Munich? How long does it take you in a Vision Jet?
So it should be about an hour and 45 to hour 50.
So they're fueling at few, I guess, and doing all that stuff, and then we're going to jump on board, and then straight line to Munich.
That's the idea. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, it's a curved line.
Oh, curved line, all right. Euro control?
Euro control routing isn't straight on this one, but hey, it's cool. More time in the air.
More time in the air.
Above the clouds.
I can't wait. I've been lucky enough to have actually flown a Cirrus Vision Jet a little while ago when the G2 version came down here to Australia for a demo day.
Flying a jet, man.
Don't believe it.
Looking great.
Now, as a pilot of a Cirrus SR22, which is this aircraft here, it's actually a relatively straightforward transition from this piston single-engine aircraft to the jet. In fact, the newest model of the SR22, this is a version G3, but the G7 version, which came out earlier this year, has actually got some identical components with the Cirrus Vision Jet. For example, the power lever in the G7 is the same physical power lever that's used in the SF50. The control stick follows a very similar design with the recessed push-to-talk button and the better ergonomic grip. And most noticeably, the cockpit itself with the Garmin screens, the touchscreen controllers, and the operation and layout of the avionics itself is almost identical between the Cirrus SR22 G7 and the Cirrus SF50 Vision Jet. So whilst there is a great deal of familiarity between the aircraft, it's still exciting for pilots like me who traditionally only ever really fly piston single-engine aircraft to jump inside a very impressive Cirrus Vision Jet. Well, this is quite the upgrade. All right, so we've just been refueled down there, and Philippe's done all the checks for the aircraft. Everything's looking great. I love sitting in one of these things. It just feels like you're some kind of rock star down here on Biggin Hill. But
spaceship.
TCAS 1, system test passed.
So what powers the Vision Jet then? Well, unlike the traditional SR22 that you can see behind me, which is obviously a piston engine, propeller-driven aircraft, the Vision Jet, well, it's a jet. But what is the jet that provides the power? Well, that is a Williams FJ33 turbofan engine delivering an impressive, it's 1,846 pounds of thrust. And the jet is actually positioned on top of the fuselage, right in between, well, it doesn't actually have a rudder and it doesn't have an elevator. The Cirrus Vision Jet's actually got something called a ruddervator, which is a combination of the two, and that's what gives it that distinctive X-tail layout at the back of the aircraft. Now, being a single-engine aircraft, just like the SR22 behind me, even though the power plant and the way it delivers thrust is completely different, the Vision Jet still has one engine on board, and you may think, well then what about redundancy? What happens if something happens to that engine? And I will come to that fact in a second. But transitioning from a piston engine to a more complex jet engine may actually raise concerns of the whole operation being a lot more complicated for engine management and even simple things like starting up the aircraft. But it's actually far harder to start an aircraft like this behind me, especially on a hot day in the Australian desert. Thankfully though, in the Cirrus Vision Jet, well, they've reduced that all to one simple control.
Fuel pump goes on, and then you just push start, and release, and now you're watching for an engine to rise. And one goes up, and you just watch it spike.
All right, so we're just waiting at the holding point for Biggin Hill to give us clearance, probably a minute or two, and then we're going to be up and away on our way to Munich. Philip's concentrating. So how much would it cost then to run a Cirrus Vision Jet itself? Well, traditionally with things like aircraft maintenance, you do an annual inspection or a 100-hourly inspection on the aircraft, and as long as there's nothing that comes up which is unexpected, you normally get a relatively similar price to what you've paid previously, and then the aircraft is released to fly again. But then there are times sometimes when you have items which have expired, like you might require an alternator overhaul or a magneto overhaul, or in the case of a Cirrus, maybe the parachute needs repacking, and then you do have spikes in your maintenance when those unexpected or those timed items actually come up. When you buy a new Cirrus Vision Jet, however, Cirrus have actually got a maintenance program which is valid for the first couple of years during the ownership of the aircraft. They call it Jetstream, and it's basically a single cost that covers all maintenance on board the aircraft, irrespective of what happens to it. Now, I had to dig in to try and find out the cost of that Jetstream package. It's not actually advertised on their website. It's obviously something that may be negotiated specifically with owners based on the age of the aircraft, the owner themselves, but it's usually quoted to me at being something around the magnitude of 100 to 120,000 US dollars per year. Now, of course, that in itself is a large amount of money, but depending on the hours that you fly the Cirrus Vision Jet, if you start to work things out, it can actually be a more affordable way to maintain and manage a jet aircraft than paying for ad hoc maintenance in the same way as you would do for something like a piston single. So I thought I'd do this quickly on my phone just so you can see some rough costs based on how many hours you fly per year. So let's put in the, first of all, we'll do 50, 100 and 200 hours as the amount of hours that you're flying per year. The Jetstream maintenance, like I said, that's 120,000 per year, irrespective of how many hours you're flying. Now, the SF50 uses Jet A1, and of course, prices vary wildly on different airports, different locations. I'm going to use $6.20 US per gallon. That seems to be a pretty good average across America at the moment. And with the fuel burn of 70 gallons per hour in the cruise, that's around $434 in fuel per hour. So 50 hours per year, that's 21,700, and then we can extrapolate that across the different hours to get the total fuel cost per annum based on the hours you're flying. Insurance then, now again, that depends on the pilot experience, the age of the aircraft, but just as a real average, I found prices from about 10,000, 15,000, 30,000, 35, 25. So I'm going to put 20,000 in as the insurance cost. And again, that would be irrespective of the number of hours that you're flying annually. And if you quickly add those up, so the totals you get then, it's about 161,000, 183, and just over 226,000 for the 200 hours of flying. Now, if you divide that by the costs per hour, so divide that by the 50, 100 and 200, you can see that the cost per hour to run if you're only flying 50 hours a year would be 3,234. At 100 hours per year, that's 1,834, but at 200 hours per year, 1,134. I'm going to apply about a 20% margin of error on all of this. So the lowest base price, if you take that 20% down, at 50 hours would be 2,500, 100 hours would be just under 1,500. But if you're flying around 200 hours per year, that actually comes down to around $907 per hour to operate the aircraft. Now, don't get me wrong, $907 is still a lot of money, but to be honest, if you're spending that much on a private jet, if you can get something like a fixed maintenance program for at least the first maybe 3, 4, 5 years of flying it, and if you can actually fly it for a decent amount of hours per year as well, it's not actually as much as I thought it would be.
Surface wind 1008 knots, clear for takeoff. Clear for takeoff, runway 21.
It was a pretty grey London day as we climbed out of Biggin Hill Airport and were cleared up into London's Class A airspace. Air traffic control actually gave us a series of turns to avoid other traffic in the area as we climbed up to our final cruise altitude of 27,000 feet. But once we were out of UK airspace, it was actually pretty much smooth sailing all the way from England across to Germany. However, as we got closer to Germany, we did start to notice that there were some storm cells building up in the distance. They didn't look too bad, to be honest, but because some of these cells were looking like they were going to be embedded in the cloud, especially on our descent into Germany, we decided to turn on the onboard weather radar in the Cirrus Vision Jet just to give us a bit more visibility over those cells as we were descending through the cloud. That added visibility really made it quite easy to navigate around the storms with a bit of help from air traffic control, and we managed to avoid the worst of it before coming in for a pretty straightforward approach and landing at our destination, ready to drop the aircraft off for its scheduled maintenance.
I don't actually think it's useful to compare the Cirrus Vision Jet to other aircraft that it's sometimes put alongside. Things like, an older TBM, maybe an 850, a PC-12, an older PC-12, maybe the Piper M600. It's quite often put next to those aircraft because, they're single engine. Yes, I know that they're propeller driven, but they're turboprop aircraft. But they're kind of all sitting in the same price bracket. The Vision Jet, it's so much simpler to operate. It's so much more advanced with its avionics. I think it serves a very different mission objective to some of those aircraft do as well. And then, of course, there's the safety features that, like the SR-22s and the SR-20s that came before it, the Cirrus Vision Jet is the only single-engine light jet aircraft with a whole aircraft parachute system that comes as standard. And that's a system that's actually been used in real life now on 2 occasions with the Cirrus Vision Jet, which has saved 4 occupants, where the pilot on board has had to deploy the cap system to bring the aircraft back down to the ground safely again. So if I had a spare few $1 million, which I've just checked and I don't, but if I did and I was to buy an aircraft like this, well, would I get a Cirrus Vision Jet? Well, living here in Australia, particularly the south of Australia, here in Melbourne, where I live, and knowing it would take me at least 2 fuel stops to get out of Australia into Southeast Asia, well, because Australia is so vast, maybe there are better options if you had that money to spend to try and get something which has a little bit more range. But then with my flying, I also fly between Melbourne and Sydney quite a lot, and knowing that you could do that just as fast but without any of the commercial delays and issues and problems and security and airport lines to fly someone like Qantas or Virgin, if you could do that in your own private jet in about the same amount of time, then that becomes really appealing. But it's when you look at ownership in places like Europe and the flight that we did, for example, from London to Munich in just over 2 hours, knowing that you'd be able to take friends and family for weekends away, discovering new countries, new airports, new destinations, well, that's when the Cirrus Vision Jet really comes into its own, and range no longer becomes a factor because you've got the luxury of that private jet, you've got the ease of operation, the ease of use, if you're using it enough, the relatively cheaper operating costs compared to some of the other jets in a similar category, then, oh my God, yeah, if I lived in Europe and I had the money for it, there is no doubt that I would want to fly something like that. Thanks, Philippe.
That was fun.
That was great fun. That's a very luxurious way to travel from the United Kingdom to Germany.
And then in a week or 2, it'll be ready for pickup.
And you come back and pick it up?
Yeah. Actually, the owner is back in town, so
Right.
he'll pick it up.
I was going to see if I could get a
But,
lift. That was off.
Yeah, to Australia.
Is that on offer?
I mean,
Great, thanks. All right,
stand by Flying Adventure
tune in.
2025.
But that wasn't the end of our aviation adventure on that day. And in this video, you can see some more behind the scenes of me and Philippe flying the Cirrus Vision Jet, as well as another bonus, unexpected, unplanned, and rather rain-soaked aviation experience that we had on that day.